And it's convenient to take a story in the old covenant and place it into the new covenant. I'll give you one more. Look at verse 30. Cast this unprofitable servant into outer darkness, where there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth. And this is where we end the sermon, and we call up the choir, and we call up the piano player and the singer, and we say, how many of you here have been wicked and lazy this week? Man, that's pretty easy. You're pretty much going to smack everybody in the face with that one, because in reality, if you just put the standard high enough, all of us have been wicked and lazy.
All right.
So that's what the church has done. They just keep changing the standard. Next week, the world's going to come out with new technology, and we're going to decide that that technology has now raised the standard of sin and wickedness. See, before you just had access to only so much sin, but now you're carrying a supercomputer in your pocket. You can look at anything you want all the time, so you got more access to sin. Church loved those days when the world keeps putting out more technology. We get to raise the bar higher on what makes people wicked and slothful. I remember the first time we saw a satellite dish in a yard. I heard a sermon on it on Sunday. I was a little kid, we're driving down the road, and there's that big metal thing out in the yard, and the pastor would get him go, I've heard that if that thing's pointing straight up in the air, that means you're looking at porn. So I used to, as a kid, drive down the road and go, is there a satellite dish pointing straight up in the air? Because that's the porn satellite. And if I saw one pointing straight up in the air, I go, I know what's going on in that house. Then they moved the big dish to the little dish. You could hide it on the side of the wall. We preached about that too. You may be hiding it on the back corner of the house, but God still knows what's going on in your heart. All we did just raise the standard of what made you wicked and slothful. We just kept changing it. So you already had a ready-made invitation. You can pop that baby out every Sunday and go, look what's going to happen to you people that have been sitting on your talent. Look what's going to happen to you people who have been buried in the sand. Look what's going to happen to you people who's been slothful. Look what's going to happen to you people who's been wicked. Man, you just keep going. You're going to find everybody. Young, old, man, woman, black, white, preachers, lay people, visitors, board members, all of them. You're going to crank into a nice song. It's going to grab hold of people's emotions, and you're going to drag them to an altar based on this. You don't want to be cast into outer darkness, do you? And you might say, hey, last week I got saved. I thought grace covered me in my sin. I thought that grace saved me. I thought that grace made me a new creation. I go, no, that was last week. You failed to read the fine print. Because you're a wicked and unfaithful and slothful servant. You're going to burn. You're going to go into outer darkness.
All right.
Pastor, it sounds a whole lot like you're mocking this story. No, I'm mocking my interpretation of this story. See, we got to learn the difference. We got to grow up and know the difference. I'm mocking my interpretation of this story for most of my life because I used this story and pulled it out of the context. I didn't even care who the audience was because as far as I was concerned, the book was not Matthew chapter 25. The book was Paul chapter 25 because the whole thing was written to me. The whole thing was in my context. It came along May 15th, 1977. That's the day I was born. That's the day that the Bible became relevant. See, that's what we all do. As we place this in our time frame, in our timeline, we put it in our culture. We filter it through granddaddy, through daddy, through the local church, through our pastor. We filter it through our denomination, our non-denomination. We filter it through our experience. Filter it through our success. We filter it through our failure. We find verses that prop up the good about us. We find verses that mock the bad about us. We use the Bible as a tool. We use the Bible as a ladder. We use the Bible as basic instructions before leaving earth because most of us are really just trying to get home. Our Christianity is really just an escape pod of sorts. We live in a world full of sin, and we know that if we can just hold on long enough. And I've stood by old people's bedsides and watched them slip out into eternity, and the last thing they would say, tragically, having lived for Christ for a half a century, and tragically, the last words that would cross their lips were, I hope I've done enough to make it home. Same guy that 2 weeks ago when he was healthy would stand in church and talk about his confidence in Jesus. Would lay on his deathbed and wonder if he'd done enough because that old sermon came screaming back in his ears. That one he heard on an old dusty sawdust path years ago in a backwoods church that told him, some of you are going to slip out into eternity. And you're going to be cast into outer darkness. And the fear that descended. Oh, and we had revivals, man. And we had turnout. And we had breached babies born in fear and intimidation, never able to walk on their own by following the Spirit, always completely codependent on the leadership of the church in order to know if they were even saved. And it made for a very successful multi-billion-dollar sin industry, sin management industry, where you came to church and someone told you how to manage your sin, and it always cost you money, and it certainly cost you time, and a lot of times it would cost your family life, your marriage, your vacation, your every waking moment Because what we had laid in front of you is the hope that if you do it right, the hope that if you are both good and faithful, someday He'll sweep that big heavenly hand and say, enter in, good and faithful servant, into the joys of your Lord. Who's cast into outer darkness in the story? It's not the 5-talent guy, it's not the 2-talent guy, it's the one guy. It's the guy that didn't invest whatever was left in his heart. It's the guy that sat on it. And so according to Matthew 24, when Jesus visits upon that generation a judgment against their system, there's going to be a darkness that descends upon that system. In fact, Hebrews 8 says that which is passing away is ready to vanish away. The curtain was falling, so to speak, on an old way of doing things. The curtain was falling on Moses until there was going to be no light left on Moses. By the time Paul writes 2 Corinthians 3, he says Moses put a veil over his face so that the children of Israel could not see that the glory that was on the 10 Commandments was already faded by the time he got down Mount Sinai. And Paul said, but there's no fading of the glory that's on you, because where the Spirit of the Lord is, there is liberty, because you are unveiled, and now you see face to face Jesus and are being transformed into the same image from glory to glory. The veil of the new covenant has been removed, and now you are free and you have liberty to see who He is and what He is.